Don Rickles, the man nicknamed Mr. Warmth, actually was the notorious stage assassin of Las Vegas and Hollywood. He made millions of audiences laugh until they doubled over, but behind those laughs were real daggers, aimed straight at the names he despised to the bone. Throughout his career, spanning over half a century, Rickles never hesitated to satirize, but there was one truth he kept secret until the very end of his life. That was the list of people he not only looked down on, but truly hated. Why did he only reveal it all when he was nearly 90? In fact, who was the name that Don Rickles hated more than anyone else? In this first part, we will trace back to the 1950s and 1960s, when Las Vegas was the entertainment capital of America, where Don Rickles, with his thorny, aggressive comedy style, stepped onto the stage and began turning the entire world of stars into a joke. He was called Mr. Warmth by the audience. It sounds affectionate, but in reality, it was sarcasm, because Rickles was not warm at all. He mocked appearance, race, habits, and even the careers of anyone sitting next to him. But paradoxically, it was that very cruelty that turned him into a legend. However, few people knew that. Not all of Rickles's jokes were just words in the wind. For some people, each of his mocking lines was a real stab, driven deep from the hatred in his heart. And in the first position is Clint Eastwood, the cold icon of Hollywood, but in Rickles's eyes, just a soulless face. Clint has two expressions. One is frowning, and two is frowning deeper. Yet Hollywood elevated him to legend. Rickles once bluntly mocked like that, right on the Las Vegas stage. The audience roared with laughter, but Eastwood only slightly curled his lip, a smile as cold as ice. And it was that coldness that fueled Rickles's contempt even more. He didn't stop ridiculing. Hollywood turned a tall, quiet guy who knows how to scowl into a Wild West hero. If Clint had been born with a radiant smile like Sinatra, then now maybe he'd be selling tickets at a fair instead of sitting in the director's chair. Rickles never believed Eastwood deserved the adoration, and every time Clint kept his face cold like a statue, Rickles had more material to turn him into a laughingstock for the whole world. But behind those laughs was real contempt. A star deified, but according to Rickles, completely empty. If Clint Eastwood was just a cold but hollow icon in Don Rickles's eyes, then the next name on the blacklist had a completely different color. That was Dean Martin, the elegant, charming man. But behind that glamorous shell, Rickles only saw a guy living off alcohol and superficiality. Dean Martin, a key member of the legendary Rat Pack. In the public's eyes, he was the gentleman of Las Vegas, glass in hand, warm baritone voice, dreamy eyes, a smile that captivated women. The whole world was infatuated with him, but not Rickles. Right in the middle of packed shows in Las Vegas, Rickles was ready to stab straight at that image. Dean, you don't really sing, you just yawn with a melody. The audience laughed uproariously, but behind it was a harsh truth. For Rickles, Dean Martin wasn't a dedicated artist. He didn't hone to perfection, didn't toil to reach the peak. Dean just needed to hold a glass of whiskey, flash a charming smile, and then the whole room fell over. Rickles once mocked, "Dean, if one day Las Vegas runs out of alcohol, your career ends too." Behind that joke was frustration. While Rickles had to sharpen every word, every jab to keep the audience laughing until the end, Dean Martin just tossed a casual quip, and the whole room applauded wildly. Can you imagine that bitterness? One person fighting with wit and sharpness, facing a guy living on superficiality and booze, yet hailed as a legend. There were nights when Rickles mocked Martin to the point the audience went dead silent. "Dean, you're so drunk that if the audience claps one more minute, you'll think you're at a bar and order another drink." That wasn't just a joke, that was real hatred. In Rickles's eyes, Dean Martin was the symbol of a disease in Hollywood and Las Vegas. Laziness deified, superficiality hailed as talent, and Rickles never forgave that. If Dean Martin was the playboy living off alcohol and charm, then the next character on Don Rickles' blacklist was even more shocking, because this wasn't just an artist, but also a president. Yes, I'm talking about Ronald Reagan. In the 1960s, before entering politics, Reagan was just a B-list actor, appearing in a few forgettable films, then gradually fading from Hollywood's lights. But for Rickles, Reagan wasn't just unknown, he was the embodiment of talentlessness. Rickles once mocked right on stage. "Ronnie, you acted so badly that Hollywood had to push you into politics." The audience roared with laughter, but everyone understood that wasn't just a joke. In Rickles' eyes, Reagan had no acting talent. He just had a fixed smile and a mechanical script-reading voice. Yet in the end, America took him from a mediocre actor to the most powerful seat in the world. Rickles couldn't accept that irony. He once bitterly said, "Even Lassie the dog had more memorable roles than Ronald Reagan." When Reagan became president in 1981, Rickles still didn't stop attacking. On national television, he lambasted, "It's miraculous. America chose a supporting actor to lead the world." The bitter thing was, Reagan always smiled. He saw it as harmless comedy, while Rickles seethed with anger because he saw in Reagan a painful proof. In Hollywood and politics, real talent doesn't matter. Just appearance and cleverness can take you to the top. In Rickles' eyes, Reagan was the greatest clown of the 20th century. A failed actor on screen, but hailed as the best performer on the political stage. And that's why Ronald Reagan became one of the names Don Rickles despised to the bone. If Ronald Reagan was proof that talentlessness can become power, then the next character on Don Rickles' blacklist was far more complex. Because this wasn't just a target of mockery, but once a close friend. That was Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra, the king of the lounge, the golden voice of America, the immortal icon of Las Vegas and Hollywood. To audiences, he was the perfect gentleman, stylish, talented, and powerful. But to Don Rickles, Sinatra was the image of a success not entirely clean. Rickles knew well. Behind Sinatra's glamour was the shadow of the mafia. All of 1960s Las Vegas trembled before the underground forces, and everyone whispered that Sinatra's career was boosted by powerful hands in the dark. Yet right on the Las Vegas stage, where hundreds of audiences held their breath, Rickles dared to say, "Frank, without the mafia, you'd just be a second-rate singer in a bar." The whole room went dead silent. People feared that very night Rickles would be dragged backstage and disappear. But no, Sinatra burst out laughing, clapped in applause, and it was thanks to those moments that Rickles became the only one in showbiz who could mock Sinatra and still walk off stage unscathed. But behind Sinatra's smile, was it real forgiveness, or just a way to hide rage in a glittering glass of whiskey? No one knew. Only Rickles understood that he had just escaped the mafia's blade, while witnessing the truth he despised, a natural talent, but backed by underground forces to become a legend. For Rickles, that was an insult to art. He admired Sinatra's voice, but hated that the fame didn't come from talent alone, but also from the power and fear he sowed. It was a friendship full of contradictions. At lavish dinners, Sinatra invited Rickles to sit next to casino bosses. But on stage, Rickles tore apart his friend's glamorous coat in front of thousands of audiences. Frank Sinatra, a friend, an icon, but at the same time a name that never vanished from Don Rickles' blacklist. If Frank Sinatra was a friendship full of contradictions, then the next character on Don Rickles' blacklist belonged to a completely different world. A legend of American comedy, loved by millions of audiences, but in Rickles' eyes, he was just the symbol of hypocrisy. That was Bob Hope. Bob Hope, the national comedian, appearing on television, in films, and on USO stages to entertain American soldier. He was praised as the man who brought laughter to every home. But Rickles saw something else, a perfectly packaged product. Sweet, easy to swallow, but with no depth. Rickles once bitterly mocked, Bob Hope is so funny that I fall asleep before he even steps on stage. The whole room laughed until they rocked. But hidden in that line was contempt. While Rickles believed comedy must dare to touch the truth, dare to poke at pain, Bob Hope chose the safe path. Gentle jokes, not offending anyone, no controversy. And that, for Rickles, was fake. He mocked mercilessly. Bob, you've never upset anyone, but you've also never made anyone laugh until they cried. In Rickles's eyes, Hope was like Disneyland, dazzling, shiny, making everyone smile, but empty. No truth, no pain. What Rickles hated most was how Bob Hope maintained a long career through safety. No risks, no breaking molds, just pleasing audiences with bland laughs. For Rickles, that wasn't art. It was just a sweet syrup hiding the truth. And so, Bob Hope became one of the names T and Rickles could never forgive. A legend in the world's eyes, but just a faded shadow in Rickles's heart. The next character on Don Rickles' blacklist was even more controversial, because this wasn't just a professional peer, but once the launch pad that helped Rickles become famous on American television. That was Johnny Carson. Johnny Carson, the name tied to The Tonight Show. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, he was praised as the king of late-night television. Just one eyebrow raise, one light remark, Carson could make millions laugh. To the public, he was an irreplaceable monument. But to Rickles, Carson was just an empty shell. Rickles repeatedly mocked bluntly right on air. Johnny, you're so charming that your wife left and the audience still didn't notice. The whole studio exploded in laughter. But those who knew Rickles understood. That was a real dagger. In Rickles's eyes, Carson wasn't a comedian. He was just a host, lucky enough to have the longest chair in TV history. All Carson did was follow the script, stay safe, and maintain the image of a smart, proper gentleman. Rickles once mocked further, Johnny, you're so serious that if you had an accident, you'd turn it into a news report instead of ever turning it into a joke. Even more biting, he concluded, Johnny isn't a comedian. He's just an MC who knows how to deliver lines on cue. What made Rickles despise him most was the self-satisfaction. Carson had power, fame, but didn't dare risk, didn't dare break molds to touch raw truth. For Rickles, that was just an optical illusion, turning blandness into legend. Behind the lights, their relationship was a paradox. Carson needed Rickles for explosive moments on air, and Rickles needed Carson as a backdrop for his sharp attacks. But the closer they got, the more Rickles despised. So, to the end of his life, in his blacklist, Rickles didn't forget Johnny Carson. A professional friend, a king of television, but in his eyes, just the emptiest king in American comedy history. The next name on Don Rickles' blacklist was even more intriguing. It was a female comedian nicknamed the Queen of Satire, none other than Joan Rivers. Joan Rivers, sharp, biting, and famous for fearing no one. She was known across America as Queen of Mean, the Queen of Sharp-tonguedness. To the public, Rivers was the icon of women daring to enter the comedy world dominated by men. But in Rickles' eyes, Joan Rivers was a hard-to-swallow thorn. From the first time sharing the Las Vegas stage, Rickles felt Joan wasn't on the same level. To him, Joan only used cruelty to shock, without the finesse to turn attacks into art. In front of thousands of audiences, Rickles coldly mocked, Joan, if you were a bit uglier, Las Vegas would put up a permanent ban sign. The audience laughed until they rocked. While Joan turned red, Rickles didn't stop there. He publicly mocked, Joan does makeup without a mirror, just looks in the mirror to self-insult. And then, more biting. She's had so much plastic surgery that, if the power goes out, her whole face could collapse like a broken computer. Behind those jokes was real contempt. Rickles saw Joan Rivers as a flawed version of himself. He hated the public calling her the female Don Rickles. To him, Joan had turned insult comedy into crude stabs, losing the grace he had built so painstakingly. And Joan? She didn't stay silent. Backstage, she once retorted, "Don Rickles isn't Mr. Warmth, he's Mr. Acid. Anyone near him too long, their soul gets corroded." That line spread throughout the entertainment world, turning their relationship into gossip fodder. One was the king of satire, the other the queen of mean. Both used the same weapon, but hated each other to the core, believing the other had sullied the art of comedy. To audiences, Joan Rivers was a queen, but to Don Rickles, she was just a noisy shadow, never reaching the finesse of insult art. If Joan Rivers was the noisy shadow, Rickles never accepted. Then the next character on the blacklist made him even angrier, because this was someone hailed as a genius, compared to Charlie Chaplin, but in Rickles's eyes, it was all ridiculous. That was Jerry Lewis. Jerry Lewis, the comedy star of the 1950s and 1960s, famous for his goofy face, shrill voice, and exaggerated performances. Falls, funny faces. In America, he was loved by young audiences. In France, the press even exalted Lewis as the genius of modern comedy. But Rickles boiled with rage at those praises, right on stage. He once mocked straight, "Jerry doesn't do comedy. Jerry just screams and hopes the audience thinks it's funny." The audience roared with laughter, but everyone knew Rickles meant it. To him, Jerry Lewis wasn't an artist, but just a carnival clown. The distorted faces, the stumbles, only enough to make kids laugh. Adults, Rickles believed, just felt tired. He was even more biting when mentioning the excessive admiration from France. If the French think Jerry Lewis is a genius, then they probably think snails are pizza. In Rickles's eyes, Jerry Lewis was living proof of a painful reality. Not every legend is art. Sometimes, absurdity gets canonized. That's why, to the end of his life, when recalling, Rickles couldn't hide his annoyance. To him, Jerry Lewis was never a genius, but just a noisy clown inflated into legend. And so, Rickles' blacklist didn't stop at actors, singers, or politicians. It was an indictment against the entire entertainment industry that exalted fakeness, laziness, and even silliness. Part 9, TTS Voice Script. After gradually revealing the names on the blacklist, a big question always arises. Why did Don Rickles keep that secret for decades? Why did he only choose to speak out when he was nearly 90, when life was nearing its end? The answer lies in the very nature of Las Vegas and Hollywood. In the 1960s, Las Vegas wasn't just the entertainment capital, but also mafia territory. One wrong word could make an artist's career vanish overnight. Rickles had mocked Frank Sinatra many times right on stage, when the whole city knew Sinatra had ties to the underworld. And each time, the whole room held its breath, fearing Rickles wouldn't walk off stage intact. He understood well, poking for laughs was safe, but publicly declaring enmity was suicide. That's why Rickles chose to turn hatred into jokes. He stabbed straight at opponents, but under the guise of just humor. To audiences, those were refreshing laughs. But to those on the list, they were daggers hidden behind smiles. Rickles once admitted, "If I publicly hated them, it wouldn't be art anymore. It would become war, and war has no place for laughter." He chose silence because his career needed audiences, needed the lights, not enemies. But that silence became a burden in his heart. All his life, Rickles lived as an artist, always smiling, always mocking, but inside were thorns that never vanished. When he was nearly 90, with no more stages, nothing left to lose, Rickles finally dared to remove the mask, that blacklist. He called it not "Who I Hate," but an indictment for the entire entertainment industry. He wanted the world to understand that, behind the glittering lights, Hollywood and Las Vegas were full of injustice, deceit, and the deification of unworthy people. That was no longer a joke. That was the final confession. When Don Rickles breathed his last in 2017 at the age of 90, the world didn't just lose a comedian. Hollywood lost a mirror, reflecting both the glory and the fakeness of the entertainment industry. Rickles' legacy doesn't lie in big film roles, nor in blockbuster movies. He left the deepest mark through a comedy style no one dares replicate. Insult comedy, aggressive humor. Before Rickles, American comedy was mostly safe stories, fun, pleasing audiences. After Rickles, everything changed. He proved laughter can come from raw truth, from pain, from things no one dares say. And when wrapped in grace, it becomes art. Rickles paved the way for a generation of comedians daring to speak straight, to mock, to touch taboos. From Las Vegas stages to late-night TV shows, to even animated films he voiced. Like Mr. Potato Head in Toy Story, Rickles left an indelible mark. The paradox is, in real life, Rickles was a gentle man, loving his wife and children, never involved in any scandal. His friends recounted that. After fierce attacks on stage, he was always the first to shake hands, hug, and say thank you. That was the secret of his appeal, a warm heart hidden behind a harsh shell. But perhaps the greatest thing Rickles left wasn't just laughter, it was a life philosophy. Art must be tied to truth. Words can hurt, but if they strip away deceit, then it's necessary. And perhaps that's also why he kept the blacklist until the end of life, to reveal, not to sow hatred, but for the world to understand that behind laughter is truth, and behind truth is a person who lived fully with art, never compromising with fakeness. Don Rickles wasn't just a comedian. He was proof that laughter, even cruel, can become the strongest weapon against deceit. And today, when we remember him, we don't just remember the rocking laughs. We remember an artist who dared turn bitterness into legacy. Dear viewers, the story of Don Rickles ends here, but his legacy still echoes in every laugh and every lesson about truth. If you find this video engaging, please hit the like button to support the channel and click subscribe to not miss the next stories about Hollywood, where behind the glamour is a world full of secrets. Don't forget to turn on notifications, because in the upcoming videos, I'll continue to take you exploring shocking truths about stars the world thought it knew well. Please leave a comment below. Share your thoughts about Don Rickles and his bitterly blacklist. I'll read every opinion, and maybe your story will become the topic for the next video. Thank you, and see you again in the journeys revealing the truth behind Hollywood's curtains.